What if everything the world envied about you was the very thing that kept anyone from ever loving you? The storm came in hard and fast over the city that night, a late autumn monster that turned the skyline into a blurred watercolor of neon and rain. Lightning forked across the harbor, illuminating the skeletal frame of the tallest residential tower on the eastern seaboard, Harrington Suites, 78 stories of glass and ambition, still 6 weeks from completion. On the windswept terrace of the unfinished penthouse, 72 floors above the streets that had made him untouchable, Charle Harrington stood alone. His white dress shirt clung to him like a second skin, soaked through within seconds of stepping outside. He had dismissed the last construction crew hours earlier, sent the private security team home, and killed every light on the top 5 floors. Water streamed off his dark hair and down the sharp lines of a face that had appeared on the cover of Forbes more times than he cared to count. Below him, the city glittered and roared, indifferent. Taxis honked. Billboards flashed advertisements for watches and colognes and private jets, all things he already owned in multiples. He pressed his palms against the cold marble railing and stared down at the life he had built, the empire that bore his name in brushed steel letters visible from 3 boroughs away. Then he spoke the sentence aloud that he had never dared say to another living soul. I am the richest man in this city, and no one has ever loved me. Not once. Not truly. The wind almost stole the words, but not the truth behind them. They had been growing inside him for years, a quiet rot beneath the private planes and the vineyard in Tuscany and the invitations to state dinners. Every relationship he had ever attempted followed the same tragic arc: attraction, fascination, discovery of the net worth, and then the slow or sudden corruption of whatever tenderness had briefly existed. Some women wanted security. Others wanted status. A few wanted both and pretended they wanted neither. In the end, all of them looked at him and saw the money first and the man second, if they saw the man at all. He pulled his phone from his pocket with wet fingers and dialed the only number he still knew by heart. Victor Langston answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and then immediate concern. Charlie? It's 2 a.m. I need you to come to the tower, Charlie said. His own voice sounded strange to him, raw and exhausted. Now. 45 minutes later, Victor stepped out onto the terrace carrying 2 steaming paper cups of coffee he had charmed from the all-night diner on the corner. He took one look at his oldest friend, dripping wet and unshaven, and handed over a cup without a word. They had known each other since prep school, back when Charlie's last name still opened doors but had not yet built them. Victor waited. He knew better than to push. Charlie wrapped both hands around the coffee and stared out at the storm. Every single one, Victor. Every woman I thought might be different. The model in Paris. The journalist in D.C. The professor who swore she hated money and then asked me to endow a building 6 months later. They all change the second they find out who I really am. Or they never see past it to begin with. Victor sipped his coffee and said nothing. I'm tired, Charlie continued. I'm 36 years old and I have spent more on failed relationships than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes. And I'm still alone. Victor set his cup on the railing. What are you going to do about it? Charlie turned then, rain still sliding down his face, and the look in his gray eyes made Victor take one involuntary step back. I'm going to disappear, Charlie said. Not forever. Just long enough to find out if anyone on this planet can stand the sight of me when I have nothing to offer except myself. Victor laughed once, a short incredulous bark that died quickly when he realized his friend was not joking. Define disappear. I finish the building. We open on schedule. And then I move in as the doorman. Silence. Nothing but rain and distant sirens. The doorman, Victor repeated slowly. Charlie with an IE, Charlie said, the ghost of a smile touching his mouth for the first time all night. Navy uniform, white gloves, minimum wage. I'll live in the staff quarters on the 2nd floor. I'll hold doors and carry groceries and call the elevator for people who will have no idea they're speaking to the man who owns the entire tower. 1 year, Victor. I stay until I meet one person who treats me with basic human decency when I'm just the help. Or until I prove to myself that no such person exists. Victor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're insane. Probably. You're worth $23 billion. 24 next quarter if the Asian markets cooperate. You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Victor rubbed a hand over his face. The board will have a collective stroke. The press will lose their minds trying to figure out where you vanished to. Then give them a story, Charlie said. Tell them I'm on an extended silent retreat in Bhutan. Or that I'm sailing around the world with no communication. You're my lawyer. Lie creatively. You've done it before. Victor stared at him for a long moment. Lightning flashed again, turning them both into stark silhouettes against the city. You'll need new ID, he said finally. A backstory that holds up to basic scrutiny. And for the love of God, a haircut that doesn't cost more than most people's rent. Charlie laughed then, a real laugh that surprised them both. Already taken care of, he said. Starting tomorrow, Charle Harrington is overseas for the indefinite future. And Charlie with an IE starts his first shift the morning we open the doors to residents. Victor shook his head, but the corner of his mouth lifted in reluctant admiration. You always did know how to make an exit. No, Charlie said quietly. This time I'm trying to make an entrance. As someone worth knowing. The storm began to ease sometime before dawn. By the time the first pale light touched the wet glass of the tower, contracts had been signed in Victor's elegant scrawl, non-disclosure agreements thicker than phone books distributed to a handful of trusted staff, and one very expensive tailored suit burned in a trash barrel on the terrace because Charlie the doorman would never wear anything that cost more than $200. 6 weeks flew past in a blur of final inspections and furniture deliveries and breathless magazine profiles about the most exclusive new address in the city. The official story held, Charle Harrington was pursuing spiritual enlightenment in the Himalayas and could not be reached. The building opened to its first residents on a crisp Monday morning in early December, gold scissors and champagne and a mayor who loved a photo op. At 6:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the lobby officially opened to the public, a man in a crisp navy doorman's uniform took his place beside the revolving doors. The brass name tag on his chest read simply Charlie. He wore white gloves and a cap pulled low over eyes that had once stared down hostile takeover attempts without blinking. His posture was perfect, his smile polite and distant. No one looking at him would ever guess that every stick of furniture in the building had been chosen by his own hand, that the marble under his polished shoes had been shipped from a quarry he personally owned in Italy. He adjusted the cap once, felt the unfamiliar weight of it settle, and drew a slow breath. The city outside was waking up. Delivery trucks idled. Early joggers hurried past with earbuds in and eyes on their watches. Somewhere above him, 78 floors of strangers were about to begin their lives in a building that belonged entirely to him and to none of them. His heart hammered against his ribs in a way it had not since he was 17 years old and waiting outside a girl's house for a first date. 1 year, he reminded himself. 1 year to find out if kindness still existed when money could not buy it, when power could not demand it, when a famous name could not summon it. 1 year to discover if anyone could love a man who, for the first time in his adult life, truly had nothing left to offer except himself. The lobby clock clicked over to 7. Charlie straightened his shoulders, fixed the polite smile in place, and watched the first resident of Harrington Suite step out of the elevator and head toward the revolving doors. He pulled the door open with a soft good morning that sounded nothing like the voice that had once closed 9-figure deals before breakfast. And somewhere deep inside the man who used to own the sky, a single question burned brighter than all the lights of the city combined. Is there anyone out there who will ever love me when I am only this? The doors kept turning. The day began. And Charlie, once Charle Harrington, richest man in the city and possibly the loneliest, stepped fully into the experiment that would either save him or break him completely. Only time, and the people about to walk through those doors, would tell which. The first 100 doors Charlie opened felt like 1,000. By the end of the second week, his shoulders ached in places he had forgotten muscles existed. The white gloves stayed pristine for exactly 6 minutes each morning. After that they turned the color of city rain and taxi exhaust. His polished shoes clicked across the lobby marble so often that the sound became a kind of metronome for other people's lives. Click, good morning. Click, let me get that bag for you. Click, enjoy your evening, ma'am. Most residents never looked up long enough to meet his eyes. To them he was simply the mechanism that made the heavy glass move. He learned their rhythms the way a sailor learns tides. Mr. Park from 27A left every weekday at 6:42 with the Wall Street Journal folded under one arm and never once said hello. Mrs. Langford in 44C tipped exactly $1 every time Charlie carried her Bergdorf bags through the sleet, as though kindness could be metered like electricity. The teenagers in 12F sprinted past him shouting about forgotten lacrosse sticks, treating the lobby like an obstacle course. Leonard, the head concierge with the sculpted beard and the permanently raised eyebrow, corrected Charlie's posture on day 3 and reminded him that Harrington Suites had standards. Leonard said the word standards the way other people said scripture. Charlie absorbed it all without complaint. He kept his cap low and his smile fixed and his voice pitched to the quiet register of someone who had nothing to prove. Inside the Navy uniform he was still Charle Harrington, but the uniform was armor and prison both. Every barked order, every ignored thank you, every time someone spoke about him instead of to him, tell the doorman to call me a car, carved another small notch into the question he carried like a bruise. Is this what people are like when no one is watching? He started keeping a private ledger in his head. Thank yous, 11 genuine ones in 13 days. Eye contact that lasted longer than half a second, 4. Times someone used his actual name without reading the brass tag first, 0. The worst were the beautiful ones who filmed everything. Kai and Lila in 60B were 27, bronzed, and famous for being famous. They arrived each afternoon in coordinated athleisure, phones already recording, narrating their perfect lives to 500,000 followers. Charlie held the door while they walked through without breaking stride, Lila's voice floating back over one tanned shoulder. We literally love the energy of this building, the staff is so on brand. They never looked at him, not really. Once, Kai pressed a folded 20 into Charlie's palm while staring into his own reflection in the glass, as though the money might be contagious if he risked actual human contact. Vanessa Blake was worse because she was older and should have known better. She lived in the duplex on 71, directly beneath the penthouse no one knew was empty. Vanessa wore perfume that arrived 5 seconds before she did and left 10 seconds after. She had a voice like expensive gin and expectations to match. On the 9th day she sailed past Charlie carrying nothing heavier than a clutch purse and still managed to complain that the revolving door was revoltingly slow. She said it loudly enough for the security cameras to hear, as though the marble itself might apologize. Charlie opened the door anyway. He always did. He told himself the ache in his lower back was useful data. The blisters on his heels were evidence. This was the experiment working exactly as intended. He was seeing people with the mask stripped away, seeing what they became when they believed no one important was watching. Some nights he rode the service elevator to the basement staff locker room, peeled off the damp uniform, and sat on the narrow bench in front of his locker until the overhead fluorescent stopped buzzing in his ears. The room smelled of bleach and old coffee. His phone, an ancient burner Victor had insisted on, stayed silent in his pocket. No one from his real life texted Charlie the doorman. The silence was part of the design. On the 13th night the rain came sideways off the river, hard enough to rattle the lobby windows. Charlie's shift ended at 11, but 3 residents arrived late from whatever gala required gowns and ego. He held umbrellas, carried shoe boxes, called 3 separate town cars. By the time the marble floor was empty again it was nearly midnight and he was soaked through despite the overhang. His fingers had gone numb around the handle of the revolving door. He locked the entrance, turned the brass sign to closed, and did something he had not allowed himself once in 2 weeks. He sat down. The lobby bench was hard and modern and not meant for lingering. Charlie rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the reflection of the chandelier in the polished floor. 13 days. 97 hours on his feet. 11 thank yous, And 4 of them had come from the same elderly man in 8C who tipped his hat like it was 1953. He felt the old familiar weight settle on his chest, heavier than any designer bag. Maybe this had been arrogance disguised as hope. Maybe people simply were what money and exhaustion made them. Maybe the answer he had come looking for was no, shouted 100 different ways every single day. He closed his eyes and breathed in the scent of rain and floor wax and loneliness. The automatic door sighed open behind him. Charlie was on his feet in an instant, apology already forming, because staff was absolutely not supposed to sit in the lobby after hours. He turned, ready to explain, and stopped. A woman stood just inside the entrance, dripping onto the mat. She wore a simple navy coat 2 seasons out of fashion and carried a cardboard tube of rolled blueprints under one arm and a battered leather satchel over her shoulder. Strands of dark hair had escaped her ponytail and clung to her cheeks. She looked as tired as Charlie felt, maybe more. She met his eyes, startled to find anyone still there, and then did something no resident had done in 2 weeks. She smiled. Not the tight polite flash that passed for courtesy in this building. A real smile, small and weary and warm, the kind that reached all the way to the eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice low and a little husky from cold. "I know it's late. The super said I could pick up my spare key tonight. I didn't mean to keep anyone." Charlie found his voice. "It's all right. Happy to help." He crossed the lobby, took the heavy cardboard tube from her arm before she could protest, and set it carefully against the concierge desk. Water dripped from the hem of her coat onto the marble. She smelled like rain and coffee and something faintly like pencil shavings. She pushed wet hair from her face and glanced at his name tag. "Thank you for holding the door, Charlie," she said. "You have no idea how much that small thing means after the day I've had." Not tell the doorman. Not hey you. Charlie. She meant it. He could hear the truth of it in the slight crack on the word day, in the way her shoulders dropped a fraction now that someone had taken one small weight from her arms. For the first time in years, Charlie felt his heart do something physically inconvenient. It skipped, actually skipped, like a teenager in a bad rom-com. Heat rose under the stiff collar of his uniform. "Rough one?" he asked, surprising himself with how easily the question came out. She laughed once, soft and self-deprecating. "My firm folded last month. Everything I spent 8 years building, gone. I'm starting over in 3B with whatever furniture fits in a studio and a stack of blueprints no one wants anymore." She gestured at the cardboard tube. "But tomorrow is another day, right? And at least the doorman didn't let me get any wetter than I already was." Charlie handed her the key the night manager had left in the lockbox. Their fingers brushed. Hers were ice cold. "Welcome to the building, Miss Scott," he said, reading the name on the envelope. "Fatima," she corrected gently. "And thank you again, Charlie. Seriously. You just made a very long day end on a human note." She lifted the tube, balanced it on her shoulder like she had done it 1,000 times before, and gave him one more tired, grateful smile before heading toward the elevators. Charlie watched her go. The elevator doors closed on the sight of her reflection in the mirrored walls, navy coat and rolled dreams and all. He stood there a long time after the numbers climbed to 3 and stopped. Fatima Scott, 3B. Architectural engineer. Recently ruined. Polite even when exhausted. One genuine thank you, offered without expectation and meaning every syllable. Charlie felt the ache in his shoulders shift, lightened by the smallest degree. The lobby was quiet again, the chandelier glittering overhead like a sky full of indifferent stars. But something inside him had tilted, just enough to let a thin blade of light through the crack. Day 13, he thought. 100 doors and counting. Maybe the experiment was not over yet. The napkin lived in the upper left corner of Charlie's locker, folded into a perfect square and pressed between the pages of the emergency procedures manual no one ever read. He told himself he kept it because it was the first thing anyone had drawn for him in years. He lied convincingly, even to himself. Fatima Scott became the quiet exception to every pattern the tower had taught him. She worked from home, which meant she appeared in the lobby at odd hours, 2:17 a.m. with ink on her fingers and a pencil tucked behind one ear, or 6:03 p.m. carrying takeout from the Korean place 3 blocks south because she had forgotten to eat again. Each time she paused at the door, rain or shine, and said, "Hey, Charlie," like greeting him was the most natural thing in the world. No one else did that. Not once. Their conversation started small and grew the way ivy takes over brick, slow, polite, impossible to stop. One sleet-lashed Tuesday she lingered under the awning while he wrestled with a broken umbrella for Mrs. Langford. When he finally came back inside shaking water from his sleeves, Fatima was waiting with 2 paper cups of coffee she had charmed from the 24-hour bodega. "I figured you weren't allowed to abandon your post to get warm," she said, offering 1 cup. "Consider this hazard pay." He took it. Their fingers brushed again, and he pretended the heat in his palm was only from the coffee. They talked about load-bearing walls and why old brownstones felt safer than glass towers. She told him she had once spent 6 months trying to save a 1920s theater in Queens, and when it was demolished anyway she sat on the curb and cried harder than the day her firm went under. He listened more than he spoke, afraid his real voice, the one that had once negotiated 9-figure deals, might slip out and shatter the moment. Some nights she brought her sketchbook downstairs because the light in 3B was too dim for detail work. She sat on the same hard lobby bench where he had nearly given up 2 weeks earlier, legs tucked beneath her, charcoal smudging her fingertips. Charlie stood at his post and pretended not to watch the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. One Thursday in late December the city decided to punish itself with a nor'easter that knocked out power from Canal Street to Harlem. The tower went dark at 9:42 p.m. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in sickly red. The backup generator coughed once and died. Residents poured into the lobby in cashmere robes and panic, demanding answers no one had. Leonard strutted around with a flashlight and a clipboard, promising the power company was on it. Phones died. Heat pumps sighed into silence. The marble floor turned cold enough to sting through thin socks. Charlie lit the emergency candles from the disaster kit and lined them along the concierge desk. The lobby became a cave of shadows and gold. Most residents retreated upstairs to bundle under duvets or book hotel rooms with functioning elevators. By midnight only a handful remained, Leonard on his dying phone, 2 teenagers filming the apocalypse for content, and Fatima. She appeared on the stairs carrying a battery lantern and a paper bag. "Thought we could use actual food instead of panic," she said, producing 2 foil-wrapped sandwiches and a thermos of soup. "The stove in 3B is electric, so this is my entire dinner. Figured I'd share with the only other person stuck down here." Leonard tried to commandeer the thermos. Fatima smiled sweetly and told him the super had asked her to inventory the emergency supplies. Leonard retreated to sulk behind his clipboard. Charlie and Fatima claimed the bench near the candle row. They ate grilled cheese that tasted like childhood and talked until the candles burned low. She told him about growing up in Detroit, about her father teaching her to read blueprints before she could spell her own last name. She talked about jazz records on Sunday mornings and how Miles Davis could make a trumpet sound like heartbreak in a minor key. She never once complained about losing her corner office or her signing bonus or the lease on the apartment with the river view. She only said, quietly, "This building is beautiful, Charlie, but it's cold. Not temperature cold. Soul cold. All the marble in the world can't fix that." He swallowed hard and asked what she would change. She borrowed a candle and a cocktail napkin from the concierge station and sketched while she spoke. A rooftop garden with real trees and real dirt. Window boxes on every balcony. A lobby mural made by kids from the public school 3 blocks over. A small lending library where people left books they loved instead of designer handbags they wanted to be seen carrying. When she finished, the napkin held a delicate pencil dream of green vines climbing cold glass. "This place could be magical," she said, pushing the napkin toward him, "if someone cared about people more than marble." Charlie took the napkin with fingers that barely trembled. He folded it once, carefully, and slipped it into his inside pocket right over his heart. The power returned at 5:58 a.m. with a mechanical groan that rattled the chandelier. The candles guttered. Fatima gathered her lantern and empty thermos and stood. "Thank you for keeping me company," she said. "I think I would have lost my mind without you." She was halfway to the stairs when she turned back. "You're good at listening, Charlie. Whoever taught you that did the world a favor." He watched her climb toward the red glow of the exit sign and felt the napkin burn against his chest like a secret brand. After that, the other residents began to notice. Fatima greeted him every single time, morning or midnight. When Vanessa Blake complained that the doorman spent too long chatting with certain tenants, Fatima happened to be waiting for the elevator. She stepped forward, voice calm but edged with steel, and said, "If Charlie goes, I go. And I'll make sure every architecture blog in the city knows exactly why I broke my lease on the most exclusive new building in town." Vanessa's perfectly glossed lips parted, then closed. She swept into the elevator without another word. Leonard developed a sudden allergy to direct confrontation. Charlie noticed other small rebellions. The elderly man in 8C started tipping $5 instead of $1. A teenage girl from 12F actually paused her music to say thank you. Whispers traveled the way gossip always does in tall buildings. The woman in 3B likes the doorman, and for reasons no one could quite name, that mattered. Charlie noticed everything, and it terrified him. Because every smile Fatima gave him was given to a lie wearing white gloves. He started taking the long way to the staff entrance so he could pass 3B and hear faint jazz drifting under the door. He memorized the rhythm of her footsteps on the stairs. He caught himself rehearsing sentences in the mirror of the locker room. "My name isn't really Charlie. I own this building. I think I'm falling in love with you and I have no idea how to fix what I've broken." He never spoke them. The words stayed locked behind his teeth like coins under a tongue. One January night the temperature dropped into the teens and the lobby heat struggled to keep up. Fatima came down in an oversized sweater and thick socks, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate spiked with something that smelled like cinnamon and forgiveness. They sat on the bench again, shoulders almost but not quite touching. She was quiet for a long time, watching steam curl from her mug. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said finally. Charlie's heart stopped, then restarted twice as fast. "Anything." "Why do you do this job?" she asked. "You're smart. You listen like someone who's run companies or countries. You don't belong at a door, Charlie." "So why?" He stared into his hot chocolate and saw his entire life reflected back in miniature. The lonely terrace, the storm, the decision that had felt so brave and now felt like cowardice wearing a costume. "I needed to know what I was worth," he said, voice rough, "when no one knew my name." Fatima studied him for a long moment. Candlelight from the disaster kit, still not put away, flickered across her face. "Whoever made you feel like you had to prove that," she said softly, "was wrong." She reached over and brushed a snowflake from the sleeve of his uniform, fingers lingering just long enough to brand him all over again. Charlie closed his eyes so she would not see the truth screaming behind them. He was falling so hard he could no longer remember what level ground felt like. And every floor he fell carried him farther from the one thing that might save them both, the moment when he finally told her who he really was. Outside, snow began to fall past the lobby windows, soft and silent and merciless. Inside, the space between their shoulders measured exactly 2 inches and an entire lifetime of lies. Charlie kept the napkin pressed inside the emergency manual, edges already soft from handling. Some nights he unfolded it just to trace the pencil vines with one careful finger. He was running out of time. The garden on the napkin was only the beginning of what he wanted to give her. But first he had to find the courage to burn down everything he had built, just to see if anything real could grow in the ashes. Snow kept falling for 3 straight days, thick and deliberate, as though the city itself had decided to bury every sharp edge under white forgiveness. The lobby arrangements changed from crimson amaryllis to white forced paper narcissus almost overnight. Charlie learned the florist's schedule the way he once learned earnings reports, Tuesdays and Fridays before 8. On particularly brutal mornings, when the wind off the river felt like broken glass and Fatima came down with tired smudges under her eyes, he would wait until Leonard turned his back, pluck one perfect bloom, and lay it across the brass mail slot for 3B. No note. No explanation. Just a single white flower resting like a promise. She always knew. The first time it happened, she came back downstairs 10 minutes later carrying 2 mugs of real coffee, dark, strong, the kind that required a French press and patience. She pressed one into his gloved hands without ceremony. "You're spoiling me," she said, cheeks pink from more than cold. "You looked like you needed it," he answered, which was only half the truth. The flowers kept appearing. A narcissus. A spray of winter jasmine. Once, a single stem of daphne so fragrant the entire male alcove smelled like spring for hours. She repaid each one with coffee, or half a cinnamon roll left warming on the concierge desk, or the quiet way she asked about his grandmother's sciatica as though the answer actually mattered to her day. They never spoke about the ritual. They simply let it grow between them like frost ferns on a windowpane, delicate, inevitable, impossible to ignore. January turned savage. The kind of cold that made the revolving doors groan and turned breath into brief ghosts. Fatima caught a fever that settled deep in her chest and refused to leave. For 4 days she barely left 3B. Charlie heard her cough echoing down the stairwell like a small wounded animal and felt something fierce and helpless claw at his ribs. On the 5th night she appeared in the lobby wrapped in a blanket over her coat, face flushed, eyes glassy. "I'm out of everything," she rasped. "Cough syrup, tissues, dignity. Pharmacy on 9th still open?" It was 11:13 and the temperature had fallen to 9 degrees. "I'll call you a car," Charlie said immediately. She shook her head. "Everything's delayed 2 hours. I looked. I can walk. It's only 6 blocks. He was already unbuttoning his navy greatcoat. "Not alone you won't." Leonard tried to protest, something about protocol and insurance, but Charlie simply took the spare set of master keys from the hook and walked out into the night with Fatima leaning lightly on his arm. The city had gone quiet under the cold. Snow squeaked beneath their boots. Every breath burned. Streetlights made tunnels of gold through the falling flakes. Fatima's teeth chattered so hard she couldn't speak for the first 3 blocks. Charlie shifted so the wind hit him first, angling his body to block as much of it as he could. When they reached the pharmacy, the security gate was half down and the pharmacist looked ready to close. Charlie didn't ask. He simply held the gate up with one arm until Fatima had her bag of supplies, then let it rattle shut behind them. Outside again, she tried to argue when he steered her toward the diner on the corner instead of straight home. 10 minutes, he said. Hot tea. You'll breathe steam and live longer. She was too exhausted to fight. They sat in a red vinyl booth that smelled of bacon and decades. He watched her wrap both trembling hands around the mug and felt the same ache he had carried since the night on the terrace, only now it had a name and a face and a cough that worried him more than any hostile takeover ever had. On the walk back she was steadier, the medicine already loosening its grip. At the staff entrance, because the lobby was technically closed, she stopped under the awning and looked up at him. I would have made it on my own, she said softly, but I'm really glad I didn't have to. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small that caught the streetlight. I saw this yesterday and thought of you, she said. It was a brass keychain no bigger than a matchbox, heavy for its size, engraved in tiny careful letters, "You are home." I know it's silly, she went on, suddenly shy. You probably have a million keys. But you make this place feel safer. Warmer. Like maybe I'm not starting over completely alone. Charlie stared at the words until they blurred. Home. He had apartments on 3 continents, a villa in Provence, a compound in Aspen, and not one of them had ever felt like the word she had just pressed into his palm. He clipped the keychain to the ring that held his staff keys and the master that could open every door in the tower. The brass glinted against the navy wool like a small defiant star. "I'll never take it off," he said, and meant it more than any vow he had ever spoken. She smiled, small and fever-bright, then disappeared up the service stairs before he could find better words. Back in the locker room he sat on the bench and turned the keychain over and over in his fingers. The engraving faced inward, pressed against his palm every time he closed a fist. "You are home." From the woman who believed he was only the doorman. From the woman he wanted, more than anything, to deserve. His burner phone buzzed against his thigh. He knew who it was before he looked. Victor, People magazine called again. "They want the reclusive billionaire for the March cover." "Where are you spread?" "I'm running out of Himalayan monasteries to invent." "When are you ending this?" Charlie stared at the screen for a long time. Snow tapped against the small basement window like it was trying to get in. He typed back with cold thumbs, "When I know it's real." "Victor, you've been gone 79 days. How much more real does it need to get?" Charlie thought of white flowers on a mail slot. Of hot tea in a diner booth. Of brass letters warm against his skin. He typed, "I'll know when I know." Then he turned the phone face down and did not answer the 3 follow-up messages that lit the screen in rapid succession. Upstairs, somewhere above the marble and the money and the lie, Fatima was finally sleeping without coughing. He pictured her curled under the quilt she had described once, patchwork, made by her grandmother the year she started architecture school, and felt the keychain settle against his heartbeat like it had always belonged there. He had come to the tower looking for proof that someone could love him without the billions. He had not planned on what it would feel like to love someone else this much while wearing a false name. Every morning now he passed the florist's delivery cart and chose the single most perfect bloom. Every evening he drank coffee that tasted like kindness. Every night he walked the lobby with the weight of a brass promise clipped to keys that could buy cities. And every time the burner buzzed with another demand from the life he had abandoned, Charlie pressed his thumb across the engraving until the words burned into his skin. "You are home." He was beginning to be afraid that the only lie bigger than his name was the idea that he could ever bring himself to leave her. February arrived with a false promise of spring, one warm afternoon that melted snow into rivers along the curbs, followed immediately by a hard freeze that turned the city into black ice and regret. The tower, however, had no time for weather. It had a gala to prepare for. The invitations appeared on a Thursday, delivered by hand in thick cream envelopes sealed with actual wax and the Harrington crest Charlie had chosen himself 2 years earlier during a sleepless night in Milan. Every resident received one. The return address read simply, "The owner." No name. No face. Just the quiet arrogance of old money and new architecture. Charlie watched them go out from behind the concierge desk, Leonard preening like a peacock as he personally placed each envelope into manicured fingers. The card inside was heavier than most wedding invitations, black ink, raised lettering, a single line of text that made Charlie's chest tighten every time he read it over someone's shoulder. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the true opening of Harrington Suites. Black tie. 8 o'clock. The 78th floor. Your presence is the only gift requested." Staff instructions followed an hour later, crisp memos in the same cream stock slid under locker room doors. Uniforms would be formal navy tails for the evening. White gloves mandatory. Smiles fixed. No exceptions. Charlie read his copy twice, then folded it into the smallest square possible and buried it beneath the emergency manual next to Fatima's napkin. The brass keychain caught on the paper and glinted up at him like an accusation. That evening the lobby filled with the particular electricity that precedes excess. Women compared gowns still in garment bags. Men discussed watches the way other people discuss children. Someone's personal stylist arrived with rolling racks that required 2 bellhops and Leonard's personal supervision. Fatima came down just after 7, carrying a small stack of mail and the familiar cardboard tube of blueprints she still hoped someone would hire her to unroll. She wore an old pair of paint-splattered jeans and the oversized sweater that made her look younger than her 31 years. The envelope in her hand looked absurdly elegant against the casualness of her She stopped at the revolving door the way she always did, waiting for Charlie to push it from the inside even though she was perfectly capable. He stepped forward, heart already knocking against his ribs harder than usual. "Hey," she said, soft smile in place. "Look what the mystery overlord sent me." She held up the invitation between two fingers like it might bite her. Charlie forced his own smile. "Fancy. Right?" She laughed, but it was thinner than usual. "Black tie. I own exactly one dress that isn't covered in drafting pencil. And it's from 2019. I'm going to look like the scholarship kid at the mean girls table." "You'll look perfect," he said before he could stop himself. The words came out rough, too honest. She tilted her head, studying him. "You always say the right thing, Charlie." "It's suspicious." He managed a shrug that he hoped looked casual. "Part of the job." Her smile faded a fraction. She glanced down at the envelope again, thumb tracing the raised H in Harrington. "Imagine," she said quietly, "if the owner is someone we already know. Some recluse who's been watching us all this time. That would be wild, wouldn't it?" The lobby noise receded to a dull roar in his ears. The marble floor tilted a few impossible degrees. For one dizzy second he thought the lie had simply walked out of his mouth on its own and announced itself. Fatima looked up, eyes bright with amusement that had not yet caught the panic in his. "I mean, probably not," she continued. "But still. All this mystery. You'd think the man wanted to be forgotten." Charlie swallowed. "Some people have their reasons." She nodded slowly, then tucked the invitation into her back pocket like it was junk mail instead of the most exclusive ticket in the city. "Will you be working the door that night?" she asked. He nodded once. "Whole staff will be. Different stations." Something crossed her face then, too quick to name. Disappointment, maybe. Or resignation. "Then I guess I'll only see you in passing," she said. Her voice stayed light, but the lightness cost her. "Some nights I wish you weren't stuck at that door, Charlie. So we could just talk longer. Without the whole building watching." The sentence hung between them like a held breath. Charlie felt the exact moment his courage gathered itself, the moment every rehearsed confession rose to the tip of his tongue. "My name isn't Charlie. The 78th floor is mine. I built this place with my own hands and my own loneliness, and I have been standing at this door for 103 days just to hear you say my name the way you say it." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Fear slammed into him harder than any nor'easter. Fear that the warmth in her eyes would freeze the instant she learned the flowers and the coffee and the walk to the pharmacy had all been bought with money she hated. Fear that she would look at him and see another cold tower instead of the man who had learned the sound of her cough and the weight of her blueprints and the way she hummed Coltrane when she thought no one was listening. Fear that the only real thing he had ever been given would vanish the moment the lie was spoken aloud. So he closed his mouth and said none of it. Instead he reached for the revolving door and gave it the gentlest push, the way he had every night for months. "I'll be around," he said. "Look for the guy in the monkey suit holding the door. Hard to miss." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "I always do." Then she was gone, swallowed by the spinning glass and the night beyond it. Charlie stood there long after the door stopped turning, staring at his own reflection superimposed over the city lights. The brass name tag caught the chandelier and threw a small hard shard of light onto the marble like a warning. That night he did not leave a flower. He could not find one perfect enough to balance the weight of what he had almost done. In the locker room he sat on the bench and turned the keychain over and over until the edges of the letters bit into his thumb. "You are home." The words had never felt more like a lie. Upstairs, 78 floors above him, workers were transforming the empty penthouse into a cathedral of crystal and candlelight. Tables for 200. A string quartet flown in from Vienna. Ice sculptures that would melt long before anyone learned the truth. Victor texted at 2:14 a.m. "Victor, final head count 187. Press is feral. I've had 3 board members threaten to resign if you don't show your face. This ends at the gala, Charle. You walk in as yourself or I drag you. Charlie stared at the screen until the letters blurred. He typed back one line. Charlie, give me until the end of the night. Victor, you're out of time. Charlie powered the phone off and slipped it into the locker. He took out Fatima's napkin instead, unfolded it carefully on his knee. The pencil vines looked fragile in the fluorescent light, ready to blow away. He traced one curling leaf with the same thumb that still carried the faint indentation of brass letters. 3 days until the gala. 3 days to decide whether to step through the door as Charlie the doorman who had earned every smile, or as Charle Harrington who had paid for every light in the building but could not buy a single honest one. He folded the napkin again, smaller this time, and tucked it inside the breast pocket of the formal tailcoat hanging ready for Saturday night. Then he clipped the brass keychain to the very last key on the ring, the one that opened the private elevator to the 78th floor, and felt it settle against his heart like a verdict he was not ready to hear. Outside the small basement window, the city kept breathing, unaware that everything was about to crack along a single invisible fault line no architect had ever drawn. The night of the gala arrived like a verdict. 78 floors up, the sky terrace had been transformed into something that belonged in a fever dream, heated glass walls pushed back to let the city glitter below, a ceiling of suspended crystal orbs catching and fracturing light into 1,000 slow-moving stars, white orchids flown in from Thailand cascading from invisible wires so they appeared to float mid-air. Heat lamps glowed discreetly among the foliage, turning February into a careful lie. A string quartet sawed quietly through Vivaldi while white-gloved servers circulated with flutes of champagne the color of sunrise. Charlie had been scheduled to change into formal tails at 7:30 sharp. Instead, at 7:29, Mrs. Goldstein from 14D tottered off the service elevator on his arm, her silver fox stole slipping, her walker catching on the threshold. She had refused the guest elevator, too many perfume allergies, and insisted the doorman she trusted escort her personally. Charlie could not leave her trembling in the corridor. She tilted her head, studying him. You always say the right thing, Charlie. It's suspicious. He managed a shrug that he hoped looked casual. Part of the job. Her smile faded a fraction. She glanced down at the envelope again, thumb tracing the raised H in Harrington. Imagine, she said quietly, if the owner is someone we already know. Some recluse who's been watching us all this time. That would be wild, wouldn't it? The lobby noise receded to a dull roar in his ears. The marble floor tilted a few impossible degrees. For one dizzy second he thought the lie had simply walked out of his mouth on its own and announced itself. Fatima looked up, eyes bright with amusement that had not yet caught the panic in his. I mean, probably not, she continued. But still. All this mystery. You'd think the man wanted to be forgotten. Charlie swallowed. Some people have their reasons. She nodded slowly, then tucked the invitation into her back pocket like it was junk mail instead of the most exclusive ticket in the city. Will you be working the door that night? She asked. He nodded once. Whole staff will be. Different stations. Something crossed her face then, too quick to name. Disappointment, maybe. Or resignation. Then I guess I'll only see you in passing, she said. Her voice stayed light, but the lightness cost her. Some nights I wish you weren't stuck at that door, Charlie. So we could just talk longer. Without the whole building watching. The sentence hung between them like a held breath. Charlie felt the exact moment his courage gathered itself, the moment every rehearsed confession rose to the tip of his tongue. My name isn't Charlie. The 78th floor is mine. I built this place with my own hands and my own loneliness, and I have been standing at this door for 103 days just to hear you say my name the way you say it. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Fear slammed into him harder than any nor'easter. Fear that the warmth in her eyes would freeze the instant she learned the flowers and the coffee and the walk to the pharmacy had all been bought with money she hated. Fear that she would look at him and see another cold tower instead of the man who had learned the sound of her cough and the weight of her blueprints and the way she hummed Coltrane when she thought no one was listening. Fear that the only real thing he had ever been given would vanish the moment the lie was spoken aloud. So he closed his mouth and said none of it. Instead he reached for the revolving door and gave it the gentlest push, the way he had every night for months. "I'll be around," he said. "Look for the guy in the monkey suit holding the door. Hard to miss." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "I always do." Then she was gone, swallowed by the spinning glass and the night beyond it. Charlie stood there long after the door stopped turning, staring at his own reflection superimposed over the city lights. The brass name tag caught the chandelier and threw a small hard shard of light onto the marble like a warning. That night he did not leave a flower. He could not find one perfect enough to balance the weight of what he had almost done. In the locker room he sat on the bench and turned the keychain over and over until the edges of the letters bit into his thumb. "You are home." The words had never felt more like a lie. Upstairs, 78 floors above him, workers were transforming the empty penthouse into a cathedral of crystal and candlelight. Tables for 200. A string quartet flown in from Vienna. Ice sculptures that would melt long before anyone learned the truth. Victor texted at 2:14 a.m. "Victor, final head count 187. Press is feral. I've had 3 board members threaten to resign if you don't show your face. This ends at the gala, Charle. You walk in as yourself or I drag you." Charlie stared at the screen until the letters blurred. He typed back one line. "Charlie, give me until the end of the night." "Victor, you're out of time." Charlie powered the phone off and slipped it into the locker. He took out Fatima's napkin instead, unfolded it carefully on his knee. The pencil vines looked fragile in the fluorescent light, ready to blow away. He traced one curling leaf with the same thumb that still carried the faint indentation of brass letters. 3 days until the gala. 3 days to decide whether to step through the door as Charlie the doorman who had earned every smile, or as Charle Harrington who had paid for every light in the building but could not buy a single honest one. He folded the napkin again, smaller this time, and tucked it inside the breast pocket of the formal tailcoat hanging ready for Saturday night. Then he clipped the brass keychain to the very last key on the ring, the one that opened the private elevator to the 78th floor, and felt it settle against his heart like a verdict he was not ready to hear. Outside the small basement window, the city kept breathing, unaware that everything was about to crack along a single invisible fault line no architect had ever drawn. The night of the gala arrived like a verdict. 78 floors up, the sky terrace had been transformed into something that belonged in a fever dream. Heated glass walls pushed back to let the city glitter below, a ceiling of suspended crystal orbs catching and fracturing light into 1,000 slow-moving stars, white orchids flown in from Thailand cascading from invisible wires so they appeared to float mid-air. Heat lamps glowed discreetly among the foliage, turning February into a careful lie. A string quartet sawed quietly through Vivaldi while white-gloved servers circulated with flutes of champagne the color of sunrise. Charlie had been scheduled to change into formal tails at 7:30 sharp. Instead, at 7:29, Mrs. Goldstein from 14D tottered off the service elevator on his arm, her silver fox stole slipping, her walker catching on the threshold. She had refused the guest elevator, too many perfume allergies, and insisted the doorman she trusted escort her personally. Charlie could not leave her trembling in the corridor. By the time he delivered her safely to her table beside the koi pond that had not existed 24 hours earlier, the string quartet had shifted to a delicate arrangement of Moonlight Serenade and Victor was texting in all caps. "Victor, where are you?" Charlie typed a single thumbs-up emoji and slipped the phone away. He would change in 30 seconds. 45, tops. He never made it back to the service corridor. At 8:01 the lights dimmed to a velvet indigo. The quartet fell silent. A single spotlight carved a perfect circle center stage, empty except for a lone microphone stand wrapped in white dendrobium. Leonard, resplendent in black tie and barely suppressed panic, took the stage with the MC's practiced smile. His voice carried over the hush. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, for 192 days the world has wondered who built this tower, who dreamed it into being, who vanished the moment the final pane of glass was set. Tonight, the mystery ends. Tonight, the world finally meets the man behind Harrington Suites. A low expectant rustle moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Phones rose. Diamonds flashed. Someone started a slow clap that died almost immediately. The service elevator behind the orchid wall dinged once, soft but unmistakable. Charlie stepped out still wearing the navy doorman's jacket, white gloves, cap tucked beneath one arm because Mrs. Goldstein had insisted he carry her forgotten shawl. He had meant to duck left, to vanish into the staff corridor and emerge 10 seconds later as someone else entirely. Instead the spotlight found him. It hit him full in the face, blinding white, merciless. For one suspended heartbeat the terrace was utterly still, as though the city itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Then recognition detonated. A woman near the front gasped so loudly it carried. Phones tilted frantically. Someone shouted the name like a swear word. Charle Harrington? Leonard's tray of champagne met the heated marble floor in a crystalline explosion that sprayed a senator's wife and silenced the quartet mid-note. Vanessa Blake, draped in liquid gold and $300,000 worth of borrowed diamonds, actually screamed, one sharp, theatrical note that would trend on every platform before dessert. Charlie stood motionless inside the circle of light, navy wool and white gloves against a backdrop that had cost more than some countries spent on infrastructure. The brass keychain glinted once at his belt when he breathed. 200 faces stared at him. Some delighted, some furious, some calculating the new math of proximity to power. He registered none of them. He saw only one. Fatima stood near the edge of the koi pond, half hidden by a cascade of orchids. She had done something miraculous with midnight blue silk and patience. The dress she had worried would look cheap was in fact the only honest thing on the entire terrace. It fell from delicate straps to pool at her feet like spilled ink, simple and devastating. Her hair was swept up with what looked like a single silver pencil. She held a glass of champagne she had not tasted. Their eyes locked across the stunned silence. Her lips parted. The microphone, still live in Leonard's abandoned hand, caught the single word she breathed. Charlie? It rang out over the terrace, small and broken and impossibly clear, amplified by $200,000 worth of hidden speakers. Every soul on the 78th floor heard the moment her heart asked the question her mind had not yet caught up to. Charlie felt the floor drop out from under him, 78 stories straight down to the marble he had once stood on as someone else entirely. He took one involuntary step forward. The spotlight followed like an accusation. Fatima's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the heated stone, pale gold blooming across midnight silk. Around them the chaos bloomed louder, cameras flashing, voices rising, someone laughing in disbelief, someone else already live-streaming. Victor appeared at the edge of the light looking like a man watching his carefully constructed world implode in real time. But Charlie heard none of it. He heard only the soft, wounded sound of his fake name in her real voice. He opened his mouth. No words came. There were no words large enough for what he had just done to her. Fatima took one step back, then another, until the orchids brushed her bare shoulders. Her eyes never left his. In them he saw the exact second every late-night conversation, every white flower, every cup of coffee, every careful inch of distance he had maintained rearranged itself into something ugly. Betrayal. The word was written so clearly across her face that the spotlight might as well have burned it there. Charlie felt the brass keychain press hard against his hip when he breathed, the tiny letters digging in like teeth. You are home. He had never felt further from it in his life. The terrace lights came up all at once, harsh and unforgiving. The quartet began playing again, some frantic waltz no one had requested. People surged forward, questions tumbling over one another, hands reaching to touch the hem of his navy sleeve as though it might still be real. Charlie stood rooted inside the wreckage of his own making, watching the only person who had ever seen him clearly step backward into the orchids and disappear. Somewhere below, 78 floors down, the revolving door kept turning for no one at all. The terrace had become a coliseum. Phones formed a ring of glowing rectangles around him, hundreds of tiny merciless suns. Every breath, every tremor of his hand, every desperate sweep of his eyes was already uploading to servers that would never forget. The orchestra had given up pretending to play, the violins hung silent in white-gloved hands. Even the ice sculptures seemed to watch. Charlie saw none of it. He saw only the place where Fatima had vanished behind the curtain of orchids, the small midnight blue gap that was closing like a wound. He moved. The crowd parted reluctantly, some reaching out to touch the sleeve of the navy jacket as if it were a holy relic, others recoiling as though deception might be contagious. Flashbulbs strobed. Someone shouted his real name like a question. Victor's voice rose behind him, sharp, panicked, useless. Charlie pushed past all of them. He found her at the service elevator, one hand pressed flat to the wall as if the building itself might steady her. The midnight silk trembled with every shallow breath. She had retrieved her old coat from the check, the simple navy one that had dripped on the lobby floor the first night she ever thanked him, and held it crushed against her chest like armor. Fatima. Her name came out cracked open, raw as a confession. She turned. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "Don't," she said. The single word carried farther than it should have, the nearest phones tilted toward her like flowers tracking the sun. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell the faint pencil shaving scent that always clung to her hair, far enough that she did not have to crane her neck to look at him. The distance felt oceanic. "I need to explain," he said. "You don't get to need anything from me anymore." The terrace doors had opened behind him, the crowd spilled out in a glittering tide, forming a loose semicircle. Phones rose higher. Someone had the decency to kill the string quartet entirely, but the hush that followed was worse. It amplified everything. Charlie dropped to one knee, right there on the heated marble, because standing felt suddenly impossible. The navy jacket pulled tight across his shoulders. The brass name tag, Charlie, caught the light like a cruel joke. "Every second of it was real," he said, loud enough for the microphones he knew were listening. "The first night you walked in soaked and said thank you like it mattered, that broke me open, Fatima. I fell in love with you right there on the lobby mat while I was still pretending I had the right to stand in your doorway." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone gasped theatrically. A socialite he vaguely recognized from charity auctions clutched her pearls as though love itself were vulgar. Fatima's chin lifted. "Don't you dare rewrite this into something romantic." "I'm not." His voice cracked again. "I lied about my name. I lied about everything except how I felt standing outside that pharmacy at 2 in the morning praying your fever would break. I lied with every flower, every cup of coffee, every time I let you think I was safe because I had nothing. That was the cowardice. Not the feeling. Never the feeling." Her hand disappeared into her coat pocket. When it emerged, the small brass keychain lay in her palm, catching the light like a dying star. "I made this for the man who listened when I was falling apart," she said. "The man who walked 6 blocks in 9-degree cold because I was too stubborn to call a car. The man who kept a stupid napkin sketch like it was sacred." She stepped forward, 1 step, 2, until her shadow fell across his knees. "That man told me I made a cold building feel like home." Her voice broke on the last word, but she did not look away. "I fell in love with him in candlelight while the power was out and the world felt small enough to hold. I bared every broken piece of my life to him on that bench and he let me believe he was broken the same way." A tear escaped then, slid down her cheek and hung, trembling, at the edge of her jaw. "That man doesn't exist," she whispered. "You let me love a ghost while you owned the sky above me." She opened his hand, he had not realized he was reaching, and pressed the keychain into his palm. The brass was warm from her skin. The tiny letters bit into him like teeth. "You are home." He curled his fingers around it helplessly. Fatima stepped back. The crowd parted again, instinctively this time, forming a corridor of silk and diamonds and naked curiosity. I trusted you with the worst parts of me, she said, loud enough for every phone, every gossip column, every corner of the internet that was already writing tomorrow's headlines. You watched me rebuild my life one blueprint at a time and never once told me the ground I was standing on belonged to you. That's not love, Charle. That's ownership. She turned then, coat clutched tight, and walked toward the guest elevator. The midnight dress moved like water around her ankles. No one tried to stop her. Even Vanessa Blake, lips parted for a cutting remark, closed them again. Charlie stayed on his knees. The elevator arrived with its soft, civilized chime. Fatima stepped inside without looking back. The doors began to close. Fatima, his voice gave out entirely. The last thing he saw was her reflection in the mirrored walls, shoulders straight, chin high, tears finally falling now that no one could see. The doors sealed. The elevator descended. Silence fell over the terrace, thick and suffocating. Then someone laughed, nervous, high, disbelieving, and the spell shattered. The crowd surged forward again, questions tumbling over one another, camera flashes strobing like a thunderstorm. Victor's hand landed on his shoulder, grip hard enough to bruise. Get up, Victor hissed. We can still salvage. Charlie shook him off and stayed on the marble. He opened his fist. The keychain lay there, small and heavy and irreversible. He closed his fingers until the edges cut. 78 floors below, the lobby was empty except for the night security guard who had once been relieved when Charlie took the late shifts. The revolving door turned once, slowly, as Fatima walked through it for the last time. Her footsteps echoed across marble that suddenly sounded cavernous. Outside, snow had started again, soft and deliberate, erasing footprints almost before they formed. She did not look up at the tower. She pulled her old coat tighter, turned left on the sidewalk, and disappeared into the city that had never belonged to either of them the way they had pretended. Up on the terrace, the gala limped on without its host. Champagne flowed. Gossip detonated in 17 languages. By midnight the headlines were already live. Billionaire's doorman charade ends in public heartbreak. Aristob leaves Harrington in tears. You let me love a ghost, the quote breaking the internet. Charlie never stood up. He stayed on his knees in the ruins of orchids and crystal, navy wool soaked through with melted snow and something saltier, the brass keychain clenched so tight it would leave a perfect rectangle of bruises across his palm for days. The city glittered below, indifferent and brilliant. And for the first time since he had built it, every light in the tower felt cold. The city forgot how to stop raining. It began the morning after the gala, thin, relentless needles that slid down the glass of the tower like accusations, and simply never ended. 21 straight days of low gray sky and water that found every crack. The streets steamed. Umbrellas gave up. The river rose and kept rising. Fatima was gone before the sun ever tried to appear. Charlie learned it from the morning porter who found 3B stripped bare, quilt folded on the bed, coffee mug washed and upside down on the draining board, a single white narcissus left wilting in a water glass on the windowsill. The leasing office had a signed termination notice and a forwarding address that turned out to be a women's shelter in Queens that refused to confirm or deny anything. By noon her name had been removed from the directory. By evening the apartment was already listed as available. He stood in the empty studio for a long time, navy jacket dripping on the hardwood he had paid for, breathing air that still smelled faintly of her pencil shavings and Turkish coffee. The brass keychain hung heavy from his belt, catching on the doorframe when he finally turned to leave. After that he looked for her the way drowning men look for the surface. He started with the ruins of her old firm in Midtown, now just a locked glass door and a stack of unclaimed mail. He haunted the Korean coffee shop on 33rd where she used to buy beans on Sundays. He sat in the back pew of the animal shelter in Jamaica, Queens, on the days she used to walk dogs, until a volunteer gently told him the schedule had changed and no, they could not give out personal information. He wore the doorman uniform every single day, the same navy wool now permanently darkened with rain, because it was the only skin she had ever touched with affection. People stared on the subway. Photographers followed at a distance. He didn't care. Victor tried everything short of sedation. First came the boardroom intervention, 8 grim-faced directors in bespoke suits demanding he return to the penthouse, issue a statement, let the PR team spin the gala into eccentric genius. Charlie fired the entire management company instead, every soul who had ever looked through the staff as though they were furniture. He did it from the lobby concierge phone, still wearing white gloves, voice calm and final. The severance packages were obscene. The headlines the next day were worse. Then came the quiet evenings in the penthouse he had not slept in since before the experiment began. Victor poured 30-year scotch and spoke in the careful tone reserved for widows and bankrupt friends. She's gone, Charle. You hurt her in front of half the city. Let her go. Charlie sat on the terrace where it had all started, soaked to the bone, staring at the empty bench where they once shared grilled cheese by candlelight. I let her believe she was safe with someone who had nothing, he said. I'm not asking her to forgive me. I'm asking the universe to give me one more chance to stand in front of her wearing the only version of myself she ever wanted. Victor gave up on scotch and switched to threats. Then to pleading. Finally to silence. Charlie used the silence to dismantle his life piece by piece. He began with the top 6 floors, the most expensive real estate in the hemisphere. Architects were summoned. Plans were drawn. Permits fast-tracked with donations to the right council members. The glittering empty apartments with their panoramic views and sub-zero appliances were gutted to the studs. Walls came down. Elevators were reconfigured for accessibility. Kitchens designed for wheelchairs. Windows lowered so children could see the skyline. Every unit priced at 30% below market for essential workers, artists, single mothers, people who had once been Fatima Scott before the world took everything. He named the non-profit that would run at the Scott Foundation, though no one except Victor knew why. Construction started on day 9 of the reign. Every morning Charlie stood in the lobby in his doorman uniform and signed whatever needed signing. Every afternoon he wrote a letter on heavy cream paper that matched the gala invitations none of them had thrown away. Day 1, I miss the sound of your cough getting better. Day 4, they broke ground on the rooftop garden today. Real dirt, not marble. Day 11, the keychain hasn't left my hand once. Day 17, I fired Leonard. He cried. I didn't. He left the letters at the leasing desk addressed to Fatima Scott, 3B, even though 3B no longer existed. Each envelope came back unopened, stacked in a sad cream tower that grew taller every day. He kept them in the locker that still held her napkin sketch, now curled and soft from handling. On the 21st night the rain turned biblical. It hammered the city in sheets, turning gutters into rivers, drowning traffic lights in static. Charlie had not slept in longer than he could measure. He stood at the revolving door out of habit, navy wool plastered to his skin, watching water stream across the marble like tears the building itself was crying. The new night guard, a gentle ex-marine named Ortiz who had started after the mass firings, approached hesitantly. Mr. Harrington, sir, there's someone on the roof. The unfinished garden level. Motion sensors tripped 20 minutes ago. Cameras are down because of the storm, but the access ladder was used. Charlie's heart stopped, then lurched so violently he felt it in his teeth. He was moving before Ortiz finished the sentence. The service stairs were faster than the elevator. He took them 3 at a time, wet shoes slipping on metal, breathing ragged. 78 floors became a lifetime. His legs burned. Water dripped from his cap brim in steady rhythm. At the top he shoved through the temporary construction door into the howling dark. The rooftop garden was still raw framework, raised planter beds filled with dirt that smelled like forgiveness, saplings lashed to stakes against the wind, gravel paths not yet laid. Temporary work lights on extension cords swung wildly, painting the storm in violent gold. Someone stood at the far edge, small against the void, coat whipping around their legs. Charlie's knees nearly gave out. He crossed the roof in a stumbling run, gravel crunching, rain slashing sideways. The navy jacket weighed 50 pounds. The brass name tag, still reading Charlie, flashed every time the work lights strobed. He stopped 5 feet away, afraid to get closer, afraid to speak, afraid the wind would steal the moment before it began. Water streamed off the brim of his cap. His voice came out broken and raw from 21 days of disuse. Fatima? She did not turn, but her shoulders stiffened beneath the old navy coat he would have recognized in a blackout. The rain kept falling, thick as mercy, thin as punishment, 21 days worth of it finally reaching the place where everything had started to go wrong. Charlie stood soaked and shaking in the uniform of the man she had loved, the name tag gleaming, the keychain clenched so tightly in his fist that blood mixed with rainwater and ran pink between his fingers. For the first time since the gala, the city went quiet enough to hear a heart try to put itself back together. The wind-up on the unfinished roof was a living thing, clawing at the plastic sheeting, ripping the work lights from their clamps so that the storm strobed white and black and white again. Rain came in horizontal sheets, turning the new dirt into dark rivers that ran between the raised beds. Somewhere below, the city drowned quietly. Fatima stood beside the tallest planter, the one meant for a sugar maple someday, and packed the last of her drafting tools into a battered canvas roll. A single battery lantern glowed at her feet, throwing a small circle of gold that trembled every time thunder cracked overhead. She worked quickly, methodically, pencils lined up by hardness, triangles nested, the brass parallel rule she had carried since graduate school wrapped in an old t-shirt. Dawn was 4 hours away. A moving truck idled in Queens. A new job, new city, new life that did not have his name carved into its foundations. She did not hear him climb the last rung of the service ladder. She only felt the shift in the air when he stepped onto the gravel and stopped, breathing hard, water pouring off the brim of the navy cap he still wore like penance. Lightning forked across the harbor, illuminating everything for one frozen second, the soaked doorman jacket clinging to broad shoulders, the white gloves ruined and transparent, the brass name tag, Charlie, shining like a small defiant star against the dark wool. Blood and rainwater streaked his right hand where the keychain had cut him again. Fatima's hand stilled on the canvas roll. He took one step forward, then another, until the lantern light caught the desperation in his eyes. I gave away 6 floors, he said, voice hoarse from disuse and shouting over thunder. The most expensive 6 floors on the eastern seaboard. They're yours now. Legally. The Scott Foundation. Affordable units, priority for people who lost everything the way you did. I fired every person who ever treated staff like furniture. I'll sell the whole damn tower tomorrow if that's what it takes for you to believe one thing. He dropped to his knees in the mud, the way he had on the gala terrace, only this time there were no cameras, no crowd, no orchids. Just rain and dirt and the raw, shaking truth. I am still the man who fell in love with your heart the night you walked in dripping and thanked me like I was human. I just had to tear the rest of it down to find him again. Thunder rolled, long and low, shaking the planter beds. Fatima's face crumpled. She pressed a fist to her mouth, but the sob escaped anyway. You came through the rain without an umbrella again, she whispered. The words broke something open in both of them. She crossed the space between them in 3 strides and fell to her knees in the mud beside him. Her hands went to his face, cold, trembling fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the soaked edge of the name tag, the place where the brass letters had worn a permanent groove into his chest. Charlie caught her wrists like she was the only real thing left in the world. I'm sorry, he said against her palms. I'm sorry I made you feel bought. I'm sorry I waited until the sky fell to tell you the sky was mine. I'm sorry I ever let you think your kindness was something I could earn with money. It's the only thing that ever made me feel rich. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, turning the rain to silver wire. Fatima's tears mixed indistinguishably with the storm. I was leaving at dawn, she said, voice cracking. I couldn't stay in a building that lied every time I walked through the door. I know. His forehead dropped to hers. I built that door. I'll tear it down and build a new one if you want. I'll live in Queens and commute by subway and carry your blueprints every single day for the rest of my life if you'll let me. She laughed once, wet, broken, astonished, and then she was kissing him. Or he was kissing her. It hardly mattered. The storm swallowed the sound, gave it back as thunder. Mud streaked both of them. The lantern tipped and rolled, spilling gold across the dirt like spilled hope. When they finally pulled apart, forehead still touching, breath ragged, she traced the name tag one more time. Charlie, she said deliberately, claiming the name and everything behind it. He closed his eyes like the word was forgiveness he had not earned yet. Always, he answered. The rain began to ease, as though the sky itself had been waiting for permission. 6 months later the rooftop garden bloomed in defiant color. Real trees, sugar maple, serviceberry, dogwood, threw soft shade over gravel paths. Raised beds spilled herbs and black-eyed Susans. A small plaque had been added beneath the brushed steel Harrington Suites sign at the entrance, written in Fatima's own careful architect's hand. Home is where someone holds the door for your heart. On a bright October morning, sunlight poured through the lobby skylight and turned the marble gold. Delivery drivers in baseball caps stood shoulder to shoulder with former residents in couture. The new cleaning crew wore flowers in their hair. Ortiz the night guard held a toddler who belonged to the single mother now living in what used to be the sky-high penthouse. Charlie waited at the revolving door in the navy doorman jacket worn soft at the cuffs, white shirt crisped beneath it, brass name tag polished until it shone. The jacket was buttoned over a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, compromise and confession both. Fatima walked toward him down the same aisle of marble where she had once dripped rainwater and gratitude. She wore simple ivory wool and carried a bouquet of white narcissus tied with navy ribbon. Her smile was small and steady and only for him. When she reached the door he pushed it open with the same gentle turn he had given her every day for months when he was only Charlie and she was only the woman in 3B who made cold buildings feel warm. She paused on the threshold. Still holding the door, she asked, eyes bright. Every morning for the rest of my life, he said, and dropped to one knee right there on the welcome mat. The ring was antique brass, simple, unadorned, warm from his pocket. Inside the band he had engraved the only words that ever mattered. You are home. Fatima's yes was immediate and tear-soaked and loud enough for the delivery drivers to cheer. They married an hour later in the exact spot where she had once thanked him for the small kindness of a dry entrance. The officiant was Mrs. Goldstein from 14D, who had insisted she was ordained online and no one had the heart to check. Vows were short. Rings exchanged. Rice thrown by people who had never been invited to a billionaire wedding before and probably never would again. Afterward, photos in the rooftop garden, now officially named the Fatima Scott Garden, with trees just beginning to turn and children from the affordable floors chasing each other through the paths. Someone hung a hand-painted sign on the maple, "Love grows here." Years later, long after the headlines had moved on to newer scandals, the residents of Harrington Suites would tell a story about the owner who sometimes still wore the old navy jacket when he greeted his wife at the door every morning. They would say he did it because some habits are promises you never want to break. And on the days when the city was kind and the light was right, you could stand on the roof and see them, Charlie in navy wool, Fatima with blueprints under one arm, walking the gravel paths hand in hand, checking on the herbs, laughing at private jokes no amount of money had ever bought. The brass name tag still read Charlie. The keychain never left his pocket. And every single morning, rain or shine, he held the door for the woman who taught him that home was not a penthouse or a fortune or even a building. It was the moment someone looked at you, really looked, and decided you were worth thanking for holding the door. Some doors, once opened, you never let close again.